in a turbulent world. So each of our writers here today have produced extraordinary works, deeply insightful in their very, very different ways. They are very different books. And the characters and the conflicts and the circumstances that feed into their novels, all, as I say, against this background of conflict, but all very diverse. So I'm going to start by asking our Lahore resident, who is Bilal Tanweer, to tell us a little bit about himself and his work. Bilal.
Thank you, Georgina. And thank you, LLF, for inviting us and putting this panel together. My name is Bilal Tanweer. I'm a novelist and a translator. I teach at Lums University in Lahore. I'm from Karachi. And my novel, my only novel, is about a bomb blast in Karachi. But the question that the book is fundamentally asking is that what happens if we don't ask the usual questions that we do ask of an event like a bomb blast? So what happens if we do not ask the questions that usually frame such events, which are questions relating to security thinking? And what if we think about ordinary people and how they get affected by these, and in many ways how lives continue to go on. You know, in one sense, I mean, my book is really the question, one of the main questions it investigates, is really the question of storytelling itself. What kind of stories do we need in order to make sense of the world in times of crises? And you have to tell me when to stop, really, because I'm a professor, so I just keep going on. So this is a question that I think is not obviously new to me or particular to times of crises, but actually it goes down to the very heart of the form of the novel itself, because novel as a form is fundamentally, I think, about or arises from a lack of a moral framework or a final evaluative moral framework. So novels are a product of a world where we have many different ways of inhabiting the world, but we do not have the final answer on which way is absolutely correct.
And I think we'll come back to that. Let's meet the rest of the panelists. Aysha, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name's Aysha. I'm delighted to be here. I'm the founder and board member of Carvan, a not-for-profit company, and also an Ashoka Fellow. And this is my novel, Beyond the Fields. And I still get goosebumps looking at it. I don't think I've ever written so much since 4th grade, when my teacher used to give me a stick of gum for every 2 pages I wrote. So, and it tells a story about a conflict, and we'll get more into that, about the turmoils girls and women face in villages of Pakistan. Thanks.
Thank you. Romesh.
Hello, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, LLF. My name is Romesh Gunesekera. Georgina said to introduce ourselves, and that's a really, really difficult question. Certainly for a fiction writer, which is what I am, I guess, the question of who are you is almost central to what it is. If I knew who I was, then I wouldn't be here, because I wouldn't be writing, because it's partly, there are 2 questions about writing, for writing, and that's who am I and what am I doing here? Seems to me central to everything that I write. And I don't even have my props with me to say, because usually if I had to do something, I'd just show you the books I've written. I've written, I think, 10 books. The most recent one is called The Suncatcher, and I think you have a copy, Georgina. And I'll be talking about that in the next session at 11:15, which is the launch of that book. And my other books have something to do with that topic because many of them are set in Sri Lanka, and my fiction writing life, I suppose, my first book came out in 1992, but I'd been writing that for some time, and my earliest stories were being published about the time that Sri Lanka hit the news as a very troubled place, which was back in the 80s, in the early 80s, when the civil war, as it was, started. So my fiction, in a sense, have had to deal with that kind of reality. And the question is, who am I to be writing about it anyway? I live in England, but I was born in Sri Lanka. I grew up there, but I guess I'm a Londoner, really. And that has its own troubles, and has had its own troubles right through the period that I've been writing as well. Probably that's enough. We'll probably talk about, as we discuss things, I'll talk a little bit about the books I've written. My last book, the one before that's being launched today, is called Noontide Toll. And that's a book set in the period immediately after the end of the long war in Sri Lanka, which ended in 2009. And Noontide Toll is a set of interlinked stories told by a van driver who's carrying people around the island, traveling to places he couldn't travel to before because of the war. But the war is over, and he's trying to work out how to deal with the reality he's seeing, how to deal with the past, this very traumatic past, and this very uncertain future that he faces. So stop there.
Thank you, Romesh. And finally, let's meet Oyinkan.
Hi, good morning. My name is Oyinkan Braithwaite, and this is my first time in Pakistan, so I'm really, really excited. Thank you to LLF for inviting me. I'm the author of My Sister, the Serial Killer. That's my debut novel, and it's a book that I wrote in a kind of frenzy. It was crazy. I wrote it in a very short amount of time, and I was desperate. I was about to turn 30, and it was not looking good. So I'm glad I did it, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about it.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Bilal, let's go back to what you were saying, because the scatter here is too great. It's set in Karachi. I found that the stories that it weaves are as kind of fractured as the blast at the center of the book. It feels like it shoots off like the windscreen that's been smashed. The way you write, it's wonderfully evocative of the content. And I wondered if you could just perhaps tell us about that blast, about the kind of inciting feature that is at the heart of the book.
Right. So I grew up in Karachi of the 90s, which was a violent time for the city, very violent time. It was a kind of an event that, the larger violent events like bomb blasts going off in the city, or there were certain parts of the city that were actually war zones with trenches and army tanks and all of that. But the parts of the city that I grew up in were unaffected by it. But obviously you get affected by it in all kinds of other ways, because obviously you get a lot of school holidays. We would also, the smaller crime in the city also is very high. So I wanted to actually document that experience where these large events are kind of background noise, but they do affect your everyday reality in a way where you do not come into direct contact with those big events, but you are affected by them nonetheless. And so I think, you know, that was the main kind of idea of the book, because I think that there is a new kind of normalcy that comes into being in such times, and that normalcy is something which where very little is kind of taken for granted. But normalcy, by its very definition, is about what you take for granted, right? So, but it's a kind of a weird thing where you're always calculating what has happened, what you have read in the newspapers, which areas to avoid during that on that particular day, what modes of transport are safe on that particular day. You know, you're doing all kinds of calculations. I mean, and I just wanted to think about that and narrativize that particular experience, because when we write about, you know, these, you know, Karachi as a city has been narrativized mostly through these large events of, you know, as I said, very violent events. But I think what gets lost in that is this sense of improvised normalcy that these large events do create. But, you know, it's a kind of a reverberation of these events that these people have to negotiate, rather than those events themselves.
I thought it was really interesting what you were saying earlier about how to create a narrative out of that. And I wonder if we need time to do so. So, for instance, if you look back at 9/11, you really only saw books that really examined it properly, coming out probably 10 years later.
Absolutely. Because I think that, you know, what I was trying to talk about earlier is really, you know, that novels in their very form are, as Romesh was perhaps also saying, is really about having a lack of a larger framework. But at the end of it, people go to novels because it helps them morally navigate those situations. Because novels think through those or narrativize those situations and offer you some way to think about those situations. But when you are writing in a moment or in a reality which is turbulent, which is unstable, as you were saying, we do not have those larger frames. And I think one of the things that my book is actually about is that what happens when you do not have that a larger frame, when you do not have that stability, where you can write about, even narrate that experience in a stable way. You do not have that foothold from which you can narrate, or you can cohere those smaller fragments into something larger and coherent.
I wonder what happens then when it's not something that affects the population as a whole, but just a part of it, like women. So your book, Aysha, is told, as you said, through the eyes, through the voice of a village girl, and this terrible trauma she's suffered. But it's a trauma, sadly, that many women are aware of.
Yes, Georgina. So I think all life on planet right now, I feel it's in one giant airplane, and we're all experiencing turbulence, whether it be global warming, terrorism, pandemics, or a frightening increase in sexual assault and violence. And when it struck me that I wanted to write about sexual assault and rape, I was frightened. I was frightened because I come from a conservative family. I was frightened because I knew I had a responsibility and I wasn't sure whether I would be able to deliver on it. But having worked in the villages for 15 years, seeing the girls and the women, the brave girls and women, they are my heroes, go through their lives so determinedly with a resolution to improve, I felt that it had to be put out. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in every 3 women or girl has been sexually or physically abused by her partner or suffered non-partner sexual violence. So if there are 3 of us sitting on the stage, I don't know what that says. So I think as an author, you respond to the turmoil around you. you can accept it and write about it. And I think what I wanted to put out was the message that there is a crime in sexual assault and rape, but then there is a situation which is a post-crime, and that's what this novel is really about. It's how do we deal with it? Do we deny it? Do we accept it and then try and keep it silent and not talk about it? Because what's attached to this crime is shame. And that's what we don't want. We don't want that for our loved ones. And I'm trying to really, trying to resolve this conflict, trying to detach the two. That why should a crime be linked to a shame? And why should we impose that on any girl or woman, anywhere?
You wanted to say something, Oyinkan? Or you were just adjusting your glasses? Because in your book, My Sister the Serial Killer, it's not so much about, I mean, it could happen, it could be set anywhere in the world. It happens to be set in Lagos, but that's not necessarily central to the plot. What is central to the plot is the characters, and the flaws actually within the characters. That's where the conflict comes.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, that the book comes across as though it could be set anywhere. And I think that's I don't think that was necessarily my intention. I'm not a particularly descriptive writer, which is why I think that happened. And maybe also because I've lived in England as much as I've lived in Nigeria, so my influences are varied. But at the same time, I actually don't think it's a novel that could be set anywhere. And I say that because, at some point writing it occurred to me that this novel could only be in Lagos. Well, I say only in Lagos. I do realize there are other societies that are like Lagos, but as someone living in Lagos, at the time, I thought the fact that these girls get away with the things that they do and the society that they're in, because there's so much corruption. If you haven't read it, there's a scene where a sort of official, a uniformed, he's not really a cop, but I'll say cop for lack of a better term right now, like a traffic cop, asks for a bribe. And I don't know if that sort of thing goes on here in Pakistan, but it's very common in Nigeria. And, being in that environment allowed them to work the system and to get away with certain things that if, for example, I said in England would be much, much harder because you've got CCTV everywhere and, there's a better system of law and order there. So I don't actually I think the fact that Lagos can be, or Nigeria can be so chaotic and there's so much corruption going on and there's all these things, made it easy for some of those things to take place. Sorry, what was the second part of I went off on my own tangent.
It was about the flaws inherent in the characters. Really.
Yes, okay, perfect, yes. But I think, again, because I'm not a particularly descriptive writer as far as setting, my focus is always on character and on dialogue and how you can say a lot without saying very much. And I am interested in women in particular that are not pure and good and kind, women that sort of do whatever they want to do when they want to do it, and they might not be particularly good people, but that's okay because, it wouldn't be fun otherwise.
Romesh, sort of in contrast, I suppose, your books, not all of them, but they are very much influenced by the fact that Sri Lanka went through this horribly turbulent time.
Yeah, yes, most of my books have a Sri Lankan connection and most of them are set there, but not exclusively. And the relationship, I guess, with the place and turbulence, which is our topic, I guess, is not one of my choice, put it that way. I mean, I started writing because I wanted to be a writer. I'm not sure that there's anything else to it. I just didn't know what I was going to write about, and it took me a very, very long time to get this what must have been a blindingly obvious idea, which is to write about the place that I knew as a child, and therefore a formative place that imprinted in my brain. But for many, many years, I never wrote about Sri Lanka. I wrote about wherever I happened to be living. I lived in the Philippines for a while. I lived in England quite a lot. So most of my stories were to do with that. And then at some point, it was almost by accident, I started writing a story set in Sri Lanka. And my relationship with it just felt different. And it was about the same time, I do remember it, a particular story called The Storm Petrel, which I was writing in the 1980s. And it was one of my first stories to get published, actually. But I remember that in the process of writing it, I started it. I'm a very slow writer. It took me months to write this one very short story. And it was a story about a man in London, a middle-aged man, much older than me, who had decided to go back after spending 20 years or whatever in England, working in an office. He decided to give that up and go back to Sri Lanka and to set up a little guest house and have a different life. And it was just a story about a man with this dream of doing that and whether it's going to happen or not. But while I was writing it, while I was pretty much getting towards the end of the story, the situation in Sri Lanka changed. And in 1983, there were these communal riots, and suddenly Sri Lanka became a place of violence. And in effect, the war started. And so, in a sense, my story about a man who simply had a dream to go back home and start a guest house had to suddenly deal with this other reality that I suddenly realized anyone who read this story, and I didn't expect many people to, but even if one person read this story and thought, this doesn't make sense, why would he want to go back if this place is in flames, as it were? I had to deal with that reality. So in a sense, that kind of politicized the story a bit. And ever since then, I guess, every story I've written had to deal with this backdrop of a changing violent situation. But it's not all a negative sort of backdrop. And my stories are not really directly dealing with that. They're really dealing with how people manage to go from one day to the next, whether they're men, no women, no children. And a bit like what Bilal was saying, what is the effect of things happening? And it could be a bomb blast, but it could also be a change of government. It could be simply your school closing down every 3 days or whatever. And what happens to people. So that's really what I've been trying to trace.
And I wonder, just following on from that, and I guess this is a question for all of you. I mean, all of these books rely on research and facts, and as you say, whether you want to or not, if you're writing about a certain time and place, you are influenced by what really happened there. And I wonder how much one can manipulate those facts in the service of narrative.
Well, shall I just continue and then carry on? But I think there is a kind of competition to what the facts are. And stories have to deal with that as well. And that's one of the reasons why the last book I wrote, Noontide Toll, which was set immediately after the war, I wrote unusually for me very quickly. It was published very quickly, luckily for me. But I really wanted to capture this moment immediately after a very traumatic event, which in this case was a 30-year war. After it came to an end, kind of everything in terms of history and stories of what happened was up for grabs. And to some extent, the history, what had actually happened, was being rewritten day by day. And there were, in the first couple of years, there were even attempts to sort of pretend that nothing had happened, that there hadn't been a war at all. And sort of evidence of it was being sort of manipulated. And I wanted to see how fiction can deal with that, that changing hold on the past. And I think to some extent, all our narratives, what we've been describing, are about trying to work out what really happened and different points of view.
Bilal.
So there are two parts, or at least two ways that I look at it. I think one is what Romesh is describing. I mean, I think that the sense, I think Marquez said this in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, that the task of writers, and he's talking about Latin American writers, but it applies to, I think, South Asian writers as well. The task that has been asked of our imagination is not to invent a reality, but to actually try to come to terms with the outsized realities that we inhabit. The weight of history, the kinds of things that we see every day. I mean, I remember I was in Karachi when Karachi airport was attacked, and it was just so outrageous what was happening. I mean, it was on nobody's horizons. And this suddenly, and the kinds of scenes that were taking place, and I was actually writing something at the time, and I said, if I start describing this, some of the things that were happening, they were so absurd, that people will tell me that you are writing magical realism. So the facts actually are just so outrageous that, your normal frames of thinking about it do not actually allow you to represent them in a kind of normal way. And the other thing, obviously, when it comes to this whole question of narrative versus fact and fiction versus fact, I think that, what I always think back to what Neruda said, the universe is a metaphor for something else. And I think that what fiction and art fundamentally relies on is what you call metonymy, which is, that small thing that is thinking about a bigger thing. So flag stands for a country. But more than that, I mean, I think ultimately what our representations, or at least in my case, I think, you are always thinking of a moral question. There is a moral question that is at the heart of every novel. And that, as I said earlier, that's also the crisis that novel as a form emerges out of, and that is what novel also investigates. So the question that's always at the heart of a novel, at least in my way of thinking about the novel and the history of the novel, is really what is the right way to be in the world? What is the right way to inhabit the world? And when that question comes into crisis, that's when you need a novel to think about it. And for that, if you have to, change around facts, I don't have a problem doing that, precisely because the primary task is to think about the moral question.
Speaking about the moral question, Aysha, is it an author's moral responsibility to respond to turbulent times?
My Beyond the Fields is set in late 1970s, early 1980s, which was a very politically and socially tumultuous time for Pakistan. And in that, the book is set in a village. And from when I worked with the village women, I realized that news and facts are almost like a Chinese whisper. By the time they came to the village, they're so filtered and diluted that if you want to be true to the voice of the women and the girls, then you really have to see the way they see the news around them. So the fact can be something else, the research can be something else, that this happened. But if the girls and the women or the villagers think something else, and that's the way news is transmitted into the smaller communities, then don't you have a responsibility to be true to that voice? Tell the story as they saw it, rather than actually what happened or actually what the law was passed. So I think for me, being an author and trying to send out messages, trying to talk about stories, or trying to give voice to stories that don't have a voice right now, and which I think are, and that's the reason actually I think there's so much turmoil, because these stories don't have a voice. So I think in doing that, you just have to be as true to your character's voice as possible. And especially for me, because I think I spent so much time, over 15 years. I think I spent more time with them than I did with my family at that time. So you just have to be genuine and honest about the voice you're trying to represent.
And speaking of morals, of course, deeply morally flawed characters in your book, and lots of questions about right and wrong and how much you can get away with.
Yeah, I think one thing I've discovered about, Romesh said earlier that writing, is almost like an act of self-discovery. If you knew, you wouldn't be, and I agree with that. And I think that when I was writing, or as I write normally, I realized that I try to stay away from judging my characters. I think outside of my books, I'm very opinionated, and if I translated that, it would be a really preachy sort of. I think it would be really boring because it would just be me telling you, yeah, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, and that's not. So I try not to do that. I try to just, Aysha was talking about representing as it is, as opposed to maybe necessarily the facts. And I think I try to do that, even though my stories aren't generally based on true events anyway. But even the fictional events, I try not to say, okay, this is what they should have done or shouldn't have done, so that the reader has a chance to decide for themselves. So I feel like my responsibility is to set the stage and, throw stuff at my characters, let them do what they will, and the readers will figure out for themselves, what they think should have taken place.
But Aysha, in your case, I mean, it feels like what you're really doing is letting people know about this enormous problem that many people simply aren't that aware of. It does feel like you are more of a crusader, perhaps.
Well, not a crusader. I think I'm trying to throw out a question which I think needs to be asked by all of us. We talk of ourselves as a liberal society, so I think it's one of those questions that has been overlooked, and for people to come up with their own decision, but at least to explore that, this too, sexual assault is a pandemic. It is increasing, and why should we not talk about it? So I think more than a crusader, I'm just trying to throw out a question. It's time we talk about it in our families, talk about it to our children, because we have a responsibility to do that. It's just that.
This is a question, I guess, for all of you, and I suppose it, at its heart, is about procedure. But when you're writing a character against these turbulent times, how do you get to the point where your character, your character so well that they can respond to whatever the unstable situation throws up? Romesh?
Getting to know your characters. I don't think I do know them. No, for me, it is the whole process of writing is to discover these characters, and to some extent, you can't. It's really difficult to work out who a person is separate from what they do. And so you only discover these characters when they respond to things that are happening in the story. And to some extent, yes, as a writer, you're manipulating, it's all under your control. But at the same time, you're looking for some magic in it. And to me, the thing about characters in fiction is that and most of us here are readers as well as being writers, but the magic of reading fiction is that you do get to know somebody in an intimate way, and this imaginary creature that actually you probably know more intimately than anybody else in the world, because there's only you and this figment that comes out of these marks on the page. And to me, that's a very, very special relationship. But to get that, I don't quite know how you do it. So I'm always just trying on the page. And when you talk about responsibility, for me as a writer, my responsibilities are very, very simple. One is a responsibility to the language, to keep that language somehow alive, and the other responsibility is just not to bore your reader. You know?
Bilal, how about you?
You know, again, no clear answer. I think that, you know, I'm close to what, how Romesh described it. But I always think of, you know, whenever people romanticize, you know, the characters taking on their own lives, I think of Nabokov, who said, you know, my characters are my galley slaves. And you know, I mean, I think that there can be different ways of thinking about it. But I think that, as Romesh is saying, that you do want, you don't want, and I think it becomes very boring very quickly, both for yourself and for your reader, when your readers are just mouthpieces for your own opinions. I think what you want is for your characters to surprise you, as well as, you know, some, for the lack of a better word, magic, something where you know that they're doing something absolutely crazy, and you think that they're being completely stupid, but they're still going to go ahead and do it. And I think that that's exciting, that when that happens, and that's something that, you know, that's a feeling that at least I, as a reader as well as a writer, love, when I know that this guy is making an absolutely reckless choice. But you know, I can't help it. You know, this is where the fun is, but this is also, yeah, it's also not in my control, but it is also kind of in my control. So I don't know if there is any clear answer to that.
I wonder if, as Romesh says, can you divorce the two, in that would the character exist without a bomb being chucked into the middle of their lives? How does that influence the way you write the person?
Right, is that for me? Yeah, I think you do throw them into difficult situations, into these uncertain moments. But I think, yeah, I mean, there is really no clear answer to that. If there is because again, I mean, there are so many things that you are thinking about. You know, so many of your decisions are really at the level of the language, you know, also at the level of how this character wants to show himself, as opposed to how what this character is going through. So I mean, there is so many levels of you know, complexity that the writer is kind of dealing with at the same time. So I don't know where that final kind of decision that character makes, whether to be reckless or not, or whether to be played safe, comes from, really. It's just, you know, I don't know. It's a very difficult thing.
I mean, Oyinkan, you have the situation where you have a character who wants to show herself in one way, but is in fact a completely different person.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I know when I don't know my character, and I know when I do know my character, but I have absolutely no idea how to get from point A to point B. It's a really weird process. I think that for the most part, like, I've tried it the other way, where you sort of, you try to map it out, you know, so you've gotten the name. Half the time, actually, I'll start without a name, but let's just say, you know, you've gotten a name and you've got that bubble around it. And then you're like, okay, this person is adventurous or bullish or whatever, and it never works out because it's just not, I don't know, it just doesn't work out. So I realized that it's easier for me if I can hear their voice, you know, at the point where I can hear them, you know, say something, and it's usually something quite quirky that would be unique to only a particular type of person, and I can follow that sort of way of talking or way of thinking more than anything else. So once I know how that person will think, and I also think, I'm also of the opinion that once your character doesn't have too many options, you know, then you know that once you can corner them. I don't know what a good example would be, but like you said, if you threw something at them and you know that, okay, these are the only two, because I think as people, we generally, we're weighed down by responsibility, we're weighed down by family or religion. There's so many things that are that don't allow us to just do whatever we want to do. So 9 times out of 10, if we're presented with a situation, there aren't too many options for us. You know, there may be objectively, but in your own decision-making process, you only think of maybe 1, 2, or 3 things. So when I can see that my character would only do A, B, or C in this particular situation, then I'm like, okay, I kind of know what's going on now. So, I mean, for my sister, the serial killer, it was not too difficult because Korede's voice was really clear to me, and it helps when their voice is very different from my own, because then I don't get confused. Her voice was different and it was distinct, and I had a really good time with Ayola as well, who's the serial killer. Every time so she's not the protagonist, but every time she was about to say something, I would be so excited because I knew it was going to be something ridiculous. So, you know, I had a really good time with them both.
Yeah, yeah. Aysha, I think another point that's really interesting in your book is this device of having twins, of being able to play almost with this double character.
Yes, so I think that came from understanding the different traits when we were working in the villages, to try and understanding the different personalities. There were some, they were there to please and to conform, and there were others that challenged and questioned. And I wanted to share and sort of represent both the voices, and I think a clear way for me doing that was to have twins. And also to share with the larger audience that village girls who we, you know, think, who even are maybe not even gone to school, are extremely brilliant and wise and strong, and it's okay. The choices they make as they maneuver and go through their lives are to be respected. So the twins were very there to question each other, to help each other, to be there for each other, but also to be very different. And it's okay. It's okay if you want to conform. It's okay if you want to question. I think the point was to through this questioning and through this this almost duality, to talk about an issue and to bring out an issue which is there for them and which sort of grips them, and how they develop their own solutions, and they challenge all the norms. They go ahead and do things, and they dare the society. They take steps which shock and might be considered wrong by some, but then what really is wrong and right, and whose definition are we following? So that's something that novel deals with.
Now, in a moment, it's going to be your chance to ask a question, so do start thinking of one if you have one. But firstly, I just want to ask about tense, because your book, for instance, Oyinkan, feels very immediate, and I think that's because you're writing in the present tense. And I'd be interested to hear from all of you how tense affects how we perceive story, Bilal.
Oh, I thought it was...
Okay. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's just trying. With me writing, I get bored really quickly, and I try not to do stuff I've done before. So every time I write, I try to do something different. When I was writing My Sister, the Serial Killer, it was writing present tense. That was one of the things I was doing that I hadn't done before. Just try it and see how it flows. Now I'm finding it a little bit hard to go back into past tense. I mean, I've done it. I think I did a short story last year, which was in past tense. But yeah, I'm finding I really love writing in present tense because you're writing as though it's happening right this moment, and it's refreshing. But I can't, outside of that, I'm one of those people who just try anything, and I stumbled upon it.
I thought what was interesting, we were talking about this before, and we were talking about how My Sister, the Serial Killer really lends itself to film, and you were saying that actually that's quite a lot to do with the way it's written.
So again, I didn't realize this at the time, but afterwards I was reading up on, because again, I like to try different styles, and I use Google a lot to just see what someone else has done or whatever. I'll just Google like whatever. So I think I was reading an article about that was comparing past and present tense, and they spoke about how present tense lended itself to film because it's in the now, and when you're watching something, you very much feel as though it's happening right that moment, which is, I think, why a lot of people have come to me and been like, we can see this as a film or a TV series or whatever, and I think it's because it's in present tense. It's so easy for people to visualize it happening right in front of them.
Bilal?
Yeah, I think my personal view of it is actually that we write, and we've begun to favor present tense more and more because of the influence of cinema. We like our novels to be cinematic, and if you see that the number of novels that mass market bestseller novels are actually written in present tense, or even when they're written in past tense, it's very close, it's very immediate, it's unfolding in scenes. And more, publishers would also tell you to actually write in scenes and do not write long expositions. Editors cut that out. I mean, for me, because I think perhaps I'm slightly more difficult generally, I tend to actually go for pleasures that only writing can afford me. So if I want to go for pleasures that I have to go for cinema, why am I coming to writing for that? For me, writing affords me certain things. It allows me to imagine certain things that I can only do in writing. There are certain images in poetry or in fiction that cannot be created either in painting or through visual forms. So for me, the question is always that if I'm writing this as a novel, what are the things that only a novel can do? And so, yeah, I mean, I personally tend not to favor this very cinematic technique of writing in this kind of, in term as scenes writing, as moments are unfolding. I mean, I think I kind of tend to build a lot of reflection in my writing, even when it's immediate, even when it's, I tend to make it about questions that only a novel can help us think through.
How about you, Aysha?
I think in the novel, I was restricted by the tense that I knew this novel was set in the late 1970s. General Zia had come into power, martial law was declared, and I think having lived through those times, which were very turbulent, I knew my novel had to be set in the past. But the challenge was, I felt that the thinking was more of present. So it was a conflict between the novel being set in the past and the thinking of the characters and the protagonist being in the present. And that's one of the challenges I found hard to resolve. And as I'm working on my new project, that's clearer to me because it is set more in the present and more contemporary. But for Beyond the Fields, I felt there was a tension there. So I dealt with it the best way I thought possible.
Yeah. And Romesh, I mean, you've written so many books and you've experimented throughout those. How does it affect you, the way you write?
I think the issue of tenses and points of view and all of these things, they're devices and they're conventions. And in a way, actually, they don't matter so much. You do it to enable you to get that book finished into what seems to me, or seems to you as the writer, its best form. And the reason I say it doesn't matter so much is for two things. One, on a personal level, I mean, that book you have in front of you, my most recent book, which was only finished not so very long ago, I couldn't tell you for sure whether it's in the present tense or the past tense, because I've written it in both. I've had versions of it in the present tense, I've had versions of it in the past, I had versions of it where it was in the third person, versions of it in the first person, and quite frankly, until I open that book, I won't be sure. And there are other books which, again, I can't really remember. And I don't think it's just a failing on my part, because actually what your relationship with a novel is something that we are all trying to work out. And I remember someone doing some research a few years ago, an academic, I don't know, Bilal, you may know, I think it was a German academic who examined people's responses to books and realized that actually, for most of us, we have a favorite book. We know what that favorite book is, but quite often we don't remember the name of it, we don't remember the name of the author, we don't know how it begins, and that I've done this experiment with lots of people when I run a workshop. I show them pages of books, and we don't remember how they begin, we don't remember how they end. We don't even remember what the story is, but we know we really, really like it, and when we see the book, we know that's our favorite book. And so many people have done this, and I've shown them pages of a book, and they say, "Oh, yeah, that sounds all right." And then I tell them what it is, and say, "Oh, but that's my favorite book," and they haven't recognized it.
That's extraordinary.
And so the tenses, I think, it's just something used to keep it going.
Yeah, yeah. Right, do we have any questions from the floor? I think there is a microphone that might be brought to you, is there? Not sure about that. But do you have a mic? Do give us a wave if you've got a question. Do we have questions out there? Yeah. The cameraman is just waving, but not because he has a question. There's one.
There's a question at the back.
It was a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it. I have got 2 questions, and my questions are meant for all the writers.
Sorry, just hold on a minute. We've just got a question happening there. Thank you. If you just hold on a minute, we've already got
My first question is, the questions are meant to be addressed by all the writers there. What are your mother tongues? The second question is, why have you preferred English as a vehicle of expression? Thank you.
Interesting. Who wants to pick that up?
Okay, so my mother tongue is Yoruba, but I don't speak it very well. So English is really the only language I speak.
My mother tongue is Urdu. I also write in Urdu. So my next book that I'm writing is a kind of a bilingual book. It will be both in English and in Urdu. So I express myself in all my languages. I have no problem. I mean, English is also my language. I also express myself in English.
Why do you decide that? Why English for that particular book?
I mean, I think at that stage in my life, I mean, I was just more comfortable writing in English. I had done an MFA. I had written most of this manuscript while doing an MFA in New York. So yeah, I just went ahead and wrote more. And then, but again, even parts of this book were actually written in Urdu. Yeah, I mean, it's very much part of my process. I write parts of my stories in Urdu. The voices in my book are all voices that I hear in Urdu, and then I try to find a voice in English, or I try to improvise a voice in English that I feel has a similar tone in English. So yeah, I mean, I don't see, I see the kind of tension, but it doesn't bother me. I have all these languages. I express myself in all these languages. There is no problem, really.
Sorry, just to add quickly, there's actually Yoruba in My Sister the Serial Killer. It's not a lot, so I do play with it at times, in my poetry as well, but I mostly write in English.
Aysha.
So my native language is Urdu, but I studied in the American school. So I think I grew up thinking in English. The challenge was when I went to work in the villages in 1998, and I worked there for 15 years, my English didn't work for me. And they would laugh at me when I tried to speak Punjabi. And it was experience, because I had to let go of a language I'd always taught in, and I had to grasp the language, Saraiki or Punjabi, that they were speaking, and build up communication with them in their language. And they would laugh at me. They would openly, it didn't matter whether I had started the program or whether I was the founder. And it was an enlightening experience to go through that. And I think it taught me a lot. But when I come to, still when it comes to, so I can have an idea maybe in another language, but when I put it out into words, I think it has to be English for me.
That's a good question, the question about language. And language, the language issue is always an emotional one. In fact, in that my most recent book, the whole idea of mother tongue and language policy in education is quite important in the book because it affects the way these kids are growing up and their parents and their relationship. For me, I suppose, I think in terms of first language, the first language is English for me. It's the language I read in as a kid, and it's the language that I taught in. And it's the language I wanted to use to write. It's a tool. And for me, it was actually quite liberating because it's a language that seems to me is no longer owned by any one group of people. And any small cluster of people can take the language and use it the way they want and feel ownership over it. And because as a writer I'm very interested in the link between myself and this tool I'm using, the language, quite often in my books, there's an exploration of this sense of ownership. So my first novel is a book called Reef, and it's told by a man who started life as a servant boy in Colombo, and ends up as an owner of a restaurant in London. And part of his story is not just taking control of his own life, but also taking control of language. And so in that book, for example, the English in which it's told is fairly simple to begin with, but it becomes a bit more complex. And as you were saying with Yoruba, my character in that Triton takes control of the language and it becomes mixed up with Sinhala and he feels confident with it. And I try to understand this, and I talk to people who teach languages, and I discover that actually, certainly with English, you can start from zero to a published story takes about 2 years. And and of course there are some very great English language writers who came to English late in life, like Conrad and so on. But I found that in English classes and so on, people could end up producing a story where you couldn't tell that this person had learnt English within 2 years, just on the basis of the story. So that relationship I really am interested in.
We started a tiny bit late. Have we time to take that last question? Thank you.
Sorry, two questions, if it's okay.
I think we probably just have time for the one. Thanks.
One, what the gentleman just said, that is it all right when you're a writer, anyone, even children, that they should write in English like most of us do, because it's a language that has become our own now. Is it because of a colonial past? But the slight tragedy is that all of us know Urdu, and yet you can create beautiful English, and with the same emotion that you have in your native language. It happens with me, and at times I feel happy, and at times I feel very sad, because I automatically go to English, because we started speaking it at a very young age, and we all had that kind of an education. So this is very encouraging, thank you, that one shouldn't feel guilty. Because this is something that you feel you're ignoring your own language.
Yes, I don't think you should feel guilty, but I think Bilal has given you a really good answer to be able to do both.
And one more question for last question please. Okay, when you create characters, this is for all the authors, do you objectify, because I heard something like you enjoy the unfolding of a character, or is it a need to be that character? Is that a reason for creating certain characters? We all want perfection, we all want to be something else, better, brighter, more beautiful, more successful. So is writing a need to create that kind of thing which is inside you, or you enjoy the unfolding as it comes. I find that slightly, forgive me for using this
Let's
word.
ask Oyinkan to start with that, because presumably you don't want to be a serial killer.
You read my mind. I think of most of the characters that I've created in my novel or in my short stories, and I'm pretty sure I don't want to be any one of them. So no, I don't think that I create characters. I'm not trying to, my characters, I try to make them as different from myself as possible. I'm interested in experiences and situations that are unlike anything that I've really gone through. So at heart, I'm a reader, so I try to write stuff that's engaging for me and fun.
Bilal, do you have a addition to that, a quick one?
I think that I tend to kind of think of writing as an extension of myself. So I think one of the reasons why I find writing so hard is because you are always writing at the edges of what you understand and your own experience. So I kind of think of, my friend and, I think one of the contemporary writers I admire the most, Alexander Hamon. He has a beautiful line. He says, all the lives I could never live, all the people I could never be, that is all that the world is. And I think that for me, writing is that is that way for me to access all of that world, that everything that I'm not. And that's what makes it so pleasurable, but also so challenging at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Aysha?
I think you're right. I think what you try to do when you write, or you're confined, when you feel yourself confined in a language, but your thoughts can be in another language. So I think that's where the piece comes, that how do I can think in another language, write in another language, and with that language to explore all the dimensions. And as far as characters, as an author, I feel you need to let your characters develop. And this was my debut novel, and I think there were many drafts of it, many drafts of it, and my characters became bolder and more questioning and more daring as the drafts unfolded. So I think your characters emerge as the plot unfolds.
And the quick last word from Romesh.
I think you don't write them to become them, but it's probably difficult not to leave a little trace of you in them.
Thank you so much, and many thanks to Bilal Tanweer, to Aysha Baqir, to Romesh Gunesekera, and to Oyinkan Braithwaite, and of course to you. All the authors will be signing their books, so if you'd like to buy a copy of their books and get them to sign and perhaps ask them a question personally, then you'd be most welcome to do so. Thank you all for coming.